And now, in this series reviewing the Star Trek film franchise, we come at last to Star Trek Nemesis, which I consider to be the worst Star Trek movie ever made, by quite a stretch. Really, it's not even close. Second place is maybe Generations, and it's way, way back there. It's just a horrible movie, Star Trek Nemesis. In fact, it's such a horrible movie that if I'm going to sit here and talk to you about it, there's something I have to do first. Excuse me. This will just take a second. Oh yeah. So why is Star Trek Nemesis so horrible that I feel the need to down a Boilermaker before I talk about it? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because it fails in two very important areas that if a movie fails in both of these areas, you can pretty much write it off. It fails in the two areas of writing and directing. You can't really do much if you fuck both of those up. And the writing thing is especially disappointing because the writer of the film is John Logan, who is a very well-respected screenwriter and actually won an Oscar a few years after this. He wrote the screenplay for Martin Scorsese's film about Howard Hughes, The Aviator. And that was a very well-written film. That was a good movie, and John Logan wrote that movie. And Logan wrote the screenplay for Star Trek Nemesis, and it is god-awful. It is so terrible. Logan apparently is a huge Star Trek fan. He wasn't just some hired gun that they brought in and said, hey, we need another Star Trek movie. They didn't really like the last one, so here, you write it. It wasn't like that at all. Logan is a Star Trek fan. So what the fuck happened? What the fuck happened? Well, I'll give you my theory as to what happened, but first let me get into a little bit more detail about what makes the script for Nemesis so terrible. There are lots of things that stand out. The first thing is just how lazy the plotting is. The plotting of this movie is so lazy and haphazard. Major story points rely on coincidences, on characters making stupid choices, on things happening that really would be incredibly unlikely to happen. This movie just builds one absurd, lazy, stupid contrivance on top of another, on top of another, on top of another. That's the plot of this movie. No cleverness, no invention, no sense of anything new or anything exciting, which is disappointing because this was the movie that was touted as like, oh, this is a fresh start for the franchise. It was pitched as, well, this is the end, but it could also be a new beginning too, you know, because there's this new screenwriter and this new director, Stuart Baird, who I'll get to in a few minutes, and they're going to rejuvenate this because it's fresh eyes and a fresh script, and it's not just the same old, it's these characters being taken on by these exciting, vigorous, new creative people, and it's going to just totally restart the whole thing. And that's the opposite of what happened. This feels like the most tired retread of any of the Star Trek movies. A major element of the plot, the villain of this film, he's this clone of Captain Picard, only much younger, who just so happens to take over Romulus and then invites Picard over for tea, essentially, and makes all these overtures toward peace and friendship. And the whole thing turns out that he just needs Picard's blood. It's just this really lame, stupid plot contrivance where the villain needs Picard because he needs to take Picard's blood for some stupid made-up sci-fi reason so that he won't die because he has some illness that is slowly killing him. It has something to do with him being a clone or something like that. Just a really weak, lame plot, and it just feels so borrowed. We've seen this idea of doubles used so many times before in Star Trek, going all the way back to the original series with The Enemy Within, where Kirk is split into two halves by a transporter accident. And then we see it in the Next Generation as well. There's that one episode where Picard is kidnapped by aliens and is replaced by a double, and then there's also the idea of how we would be different if we had different life experiences, like the great episode The Inner Light, where Picard sort of dreams that he lives this entire lifetime on an alien world as a different person, and then he sort of snaps back to his life as Captain Picard, and there's sort of a weird kind of adjustment that he has to make. He has to get used to being himself again. And so this is a very well-mined theme in Star Trek, the themes of identity and the themes of who we are and what makes us who we are. And it could be really interesting. And Nemesis sort of aspires to make us consider these questions by showing us Shinzon, who is genetically identical to Picard, and then showing us the Picard we know and asking the question of, what makes him any different than him, and would our Picard be the same as Shinzon if placed in that situation, and et cetera, et cetera. There are all these questions that are asked, but are only addressed really, really superficially. And that could have been what the movie was about. And that's not what the movie was about. The movie was actually a dumb, boring action movie with just a hint of those sort of more deep thematic elements sprinkled on the top, and which makes it even worse when it asks these really interesting questions, and then instead of answering them, just sort of goes, "What's that over there?" Let's talk a little bit about Stuart Baird as a director. Stuart Baird actually has a very well-deserved reputation for being an editor in Hollywood. He is a really, really, really good editor. Stuart Baird's talents obviously lie in the editing room, not behind the camera, not in the director's chair. He's judging by Nemesis, which I think is the only film of his that he has directed that I have seen. But just judging by that, he's a god-awful, terrible director. He should not be allowed to direct movies if that is what happens. It's just such a lethargic movie. There's no energy. There's no excitement. Ironically, those are the sorts of things that often an editor is called upon to inject into a somewhat lackluster movie in the direction department. And Stuart Baird, as a director, he directs this movie just very limply. It's just a very limp, flaccid movie. They probably would have been better off just hiring Frakes to direct it again. Just get Jonathan Frakes to direct it again, because he did a fine job on First Contact. He did a fine job on Insurrection. Just let Frakes direct it again. Let Stuart Baird edit it, and at least that would be an improvement, even with the shitty John Logan screenplay. At least that would be an improvement. The best thing to do would be to fucking fire John Logan's ass and hire someone else. Maybe someone who's not so close to the material to rewrite it, because I think the best Star Trek movies, of all of the Star Trek movies, the two best ones, again, for my money, as you've seen if you've watched these earlier reviews, is Star Trek II and Star Trek VI. Both of those were co-written and directed by Nicholas Meyer, who is an incredibly talented writer and filmmaker who does not give two shits about Star Trek, who is not a Star Trek fan, who doesn't feel close to the characters or close to the franchise. And I think that is very important. There's something about Star Trek that a real love of it, a real affection for it, and a closeness to it has this warping effect. It has the fanfic effect, where you start doing things that you think might be cool, like from a fanboy perspective, but don't work from a story perspective. And when you have a talented person like Nick Meyer, who is able to maintain a distance from the material and is able to say, I don't give a fuck about this, I'm not a Trekkie, but let's look at these characters as characters. It's like the way Christians look at the Bible. You can't look at the Bible as the Word of God and expect to get shit out of it. You have to look at it critically as a work of literature, as a work of mythology, and then you can derive all sorts of interesting stuff from it. And if you look at Star Trek as a television show with characters, and look at its themes, and look at its characters, and look at its stories, and dissect them and examine them critically, and say, okay, what works, what doesn't, who are these characters, what in essence is this show about, who are these people, what conflicts can we present these people with that will allow us as storytellers to show people who they are and explore interesting facets of their characters and ask interesting questions about them and attempt to answer those questions, and all the things that makes great drama and great adventure and great science fiction and all this stuff. It's easier to do that if you have a little bit of distance from the material. Of all the Star Trek films, this is the worst, because this is the movie that killed Star Trek. This movie was so bad and was such a box office bomb that it literally killed the franchise. This was the last Star Trek movie. It was so terrible that when they made the next Star Trek movie, they went back to the beginning and restarted the whole thing. They said, this is it. We need to scorch the earth and just start over. That's how shitty Star Trek Nemesis was. It killed the franchise and forced Paramount to rewind the tape all the way back to 1966 and to start the franchise over. And that's where we are now. We're in this restarted franchise, which began with the next and final film I'm going to review before I review the new movie, Star Trek Into Darkness, which I haven't seen, obviously. And that is J.J. Abrams' Star Trek. The reboot, restart, prequel, sequel. It's all kinds of stuff. It's all mushed together in one thing. And that is the next movie in the Star Trek franchise that I'm going to review in the very next video in this series.